Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Man, they're all around me. Look at all these zombies. Hey, some of them are pretty cute, actually. I can't get out of here. I'm always trapped in some sort of supernatural void, some other dimension, well beyond space and time and my own thought pattern here. But we're going to have a great ghoulish time tonight because we got some fantastic guests on. And it's approaching that time of the year. Fall is settling in. The big pumpkin is on the lawn. The bottle of vodka is stuck in my shirt pocket. And we're going to be celebrating Halloween. Isn't that right, Tim?
Yes, that's right, Tim. And they're looking for an offering of flesh and blood from you tonight.
Well, I almost gave it to him this week, I'll tell you that.
They sure did.
But we're safe and sound and as grounded as we could possibly be. But I know at least one of our guests this evening, a very attractive, talented lady, is known to be lifted up into the air, though I don't know if necessarily by supernatural forces. So, Tim, what have you been up to? How are you getting prepared for the day?
Well, Tim, first of all, welcome back to the show. We missed you last week.
Well, darn right. See that? And I missed the sexy saucer people.
That's right, live nude aliens. Heard only on Exploring the Bizarre.
There you go. Too bad it's not a video.
Well, like you said, Tim, we're getting ready for Halloween around here. Of course, now we had our Halloween camp out a couple of weeks ago, and for anybody curious, they can always see my picture from on Skype or on my Facebook account. That was my award-winning Halloween costume. So,
what do you do during a Halloween camp out?
There is a pretty large campground near us. It's called Lake Rudolph, and every weekend in October, they have a big Halloween party. People will come in and they'll set up a big haunted houses. Some of them spend thousands of dollars on these very elaborate haunted houses. And then, we take the kids so the kids can go trick-or-treating. And then, of course, the adults, like to join in. And, we have our costumes as well. Sometimes I think we adults have more fun with this than the kids do. But as long as the kids get candy, they're happy.
Well, of course, the big Halloween parade that goes through Greenwich Village is coming up on Halloween Eve, and that attracts thousands of people with probably some of the most elaborate costumes you will ever possibly imagine or see this side of the Milky Way.
I'd love to go to see that in person sometime.
Well, don't you remember, though, in one of our films, I believe it's Blood-Sucking Vampire Freaks, it opens with the parade, the marchers going down the street.
Well, yes, of course I remember that.
Mm-hmm. You edited, so you...
Yeah, I should remember it.
Anyway, enough of our chat about Halloween, at least for the moment. Why don't you tell everyone who we are honored to have with us this evening?
Well, yes. Well, let's start out with Samantha Scarlette. Now, Samantha is an alternative rock singer-songwriter, and she is the host of Blackout on Adobe. Am I pronouncing that right, Samantha? Adobe Radio.
Idobi.
Adobe Radio. There you go. And the owner of MK Ultra Nighty Clothing, and she's also an alternative model. Now, Samantha currently has 2 albums out: Into the Darkness, EP and demos, produced by Justin Salter, and Violent Delights and Violent Ends. And she's currently
I think, in fact, we're going to be hearing some clips from these productions.
Yes,
Awesome.
I hope so. I hope so. And now Scarletta has already had an avid fascination with the paranormal, conspiracies, etc. In 2015, she started a YouTube podcast with a friend dedicated to these topics, and she later went on to host I Want to Believe with Samantha Scarlette for Energy Rock Radio in 2016. Now, she currently lives in New York City with her pet Yorkie, and her hobbies include listening to vinyls of 90 rock albums, all right for you, meals at the plaza, body suspension, visiting art museums, listening to old Art Bell interviews on YouTube, and watching silent films, filmmaking, yoga, meditation, and fitness. So, Samantha, welcome to Exploring the Bizarre. And, of course, let's not forget, we also have with us tonight Brad Steiger, our very good and dear friend. Brad has been publishing short stories and articles of mystery and the paranormal since, oh my gosh, I think forever. He's written for such magazines such as Alfred Hitchcock's The Saint, Fantastic, Fate magazine. He actually wrote a newspaper column, if anybody out there remembers newspapers, called The Strange World of Brad Steiger. He also wrote a best-selling biography of the silent screen lover Valentino, which was made into a motion picture by British director Ken Russell. And I'll tell you something, Brad. I mean, to have Ken Russell make a movie based on your book, I could die happy right then and there.
Don't mention the word death, please.
Well, and of course, Brad is the author of so many books that it would take us the entire show, Tim, to name them all off. Of course, some of them are Conspiracies and Secret Societies, The Complete Dossier, The Werewolf Book, The Encyclopedia of Shape-Shifting Beings, and of course, The Philadelphia Experiment and Other UFO Conspiracies, which I think that was published by, some publishing company. I can't remember the name of it, and Real Ghosts, Restless Spirits, and Haunted Places. They're actually a reprint of that recently, and then Real Monsters, Gruesome Creatures, and Beast from the Dark Side. That's just a few of the many books of Brad Steiger. So, Brad, Samantha, welcome to Exploring the Bizarre.
Thank you for having me on.
Hey, this is I'm looking forward to this. Samantha, how'd you get into all of this? I mean, okay, the singing I could understand, but the high suspension. What did you give us a little bit about your background? How did you become so oriented into the the dark side, the macabre, the occult? How would you describe yourself in 10 easy words?
I don't know about 10 words, because tonight I'm not really on my A game because I'm not feeling well. But I don't know. I really am not so much into the darkness as people think. I mean, like, I love dark aesthetics, like Victorian interiors, and I like gothic clothing, or dressing in black, not so much like goth. Like, you won't really catch me in like one of those long dresses that, like, you think of with like goth. But it all kind of started when I was a kid. I guess it's before I always say it was like listening to Art Bell, but I guess it was before that. I used to watch like these TV shows. Like, there was one on Disney Channel that was called So Weird. It was kind of like X-Files for kids. And then I liked watching those like most haunted, scariest places on earth, MTV Fear, that were like the shows where the people went into supposedly haunted locations and like did like like challenges, which they really, looking back, those shows really had nothing to do with ghost hunting. There was a very little actual haunting activity on those, but got me really interested in that subject. And I always had insomnia, and I would like listen to Art Bell every night since I was like 11. So it just got me really hooked on that. And then I love rock music, so it all kind of just goes hand in hand.
And what would you consider? What would be your main, if you had to have one, select one? What would you consider to be your main profession?
I honestly, I don't know, because I mean, the music's always been more of my identity, but at this point I probably do more radio, because music, there's really no money in music anymore, and it's kind of a dying field.
And no place to play rock and roll in New York, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
It's a.
Well, I mean, there are, but I like, like hipster stuff. But as far as trying to have a mainstream music career, it's kind of, that ship has pretty much sailed. But yeah, so I guess now it's pretty much radio.
Well, I tell you, I enjoyed listening to your several of the cuts that you had up there on YouTube. It's kind of the music that I'm into, and I've always enjoyed female rock musicians. I mean, Bonnie Parker. Awesome. I mean, just like Judas Priestess. Bands, I guess, because the guys always felt that they were more superior when it came to playing, guitar or performing. Certainly, nobody's more a better guitar player than Lita Ford, or whatever. So Joan Jett, and so I said, well, man, this gal seems to have a lot going for her. So, do you write your own music, or? I
do. I've always written my own music, because I feel like it's cheating if you have somebody else write it. So I'm a terrible guitarist, but I write my music on the guitar. I do write the music, and then when I go into the studio, actually on my older stuff, I actually did play guitar on some of the older tracks, like on the song Iron Maiden. I played the lead guitar on that, and I played the synthesizer. On The Demon, I played the lead guitar, and I guess like pretty much 90% of the guitar on that song is me. Same with Morning Fantasy. But since 2013, I haven't played on my recordings, just because it's easier to go into a studio just for like time constraint, to have somebody else play the stuff, and it sounds better, because I'm just like not that great of a guitarist. But I do write everything, and then like whoever I'm working with as a producer, they'll usually tweak it or like add in like a guitar solo or whatever. Though the guitar solo on page 6 I wrote, I just didn't play it on the album.
Hey, I'm thinking now. Maybe we could put in a little bit of music at this point, so our listeners can kind of get an idea of where you're coming from. Are we tuned up over there? I wonder, in the engineering department. To play.
I don't know. Our producer said that she'll play a few of Samantha cuts from Samantha's song at the bottom of the hour break.
Oh, so the power of the hour. Oh,
yeah. Okay. We may have to wait. We may have to wait until then. So.
Well, that's
yeah. Right now, Tina, I can just see her. She's scrambling at her board, and spittle flying from her mouth as she is quietly cursing us out.
But yeah, I'm pretty much a purist as far as trying to do what I actually like, and so I write all my stuff. I've had people, like a year ago, I had this guy who's a music manager approach me, and he was like, "Oh, I think you could have a great career in rock. I want you to spend XYZ amount for like different stuff, and I want you to hire somebody to co-write your music, and I want you to do a completely different genre of rock that's one that I don't like." And we'll say that as far as the co-write, it was like that this guy would write the music and the lyrics, and I could put input on the second verse. And I was just like, no, I'm not gonna like lie and put my name on something I didn't write. And I'm not going to play a genre of rock that I don't like. So I'd rather like not make music than do that.
Did you ever see one of my favorite New York bands was Psycho Sluts?
No, I don't really go. That's the thing. I'm not somebody that actually goes to like local band music. Like the last concert I went to something last night that was something I would never go to. I had like a guest list, but the last concert like I went willingly to was Billy Corgan played in Brooklyn about 2 weeks ago, acoustic, and it was amazing.
Very good. Well, tell us a little bit something about the the suspension.
Everybody's curious about that.
Yeah.
So I guess that's something that I saw like 10 years ago, maybe longer, on the Travel Channel, and I thought it was absolutely crazy and like something I would never do. And then after I moved to New York, I like saw people I was friends with on Facebook post videos or pictures doing it, and I just thought that was like, I still thought it was really crazy, but I like read up on it more, and I found it like interesting. Like I had kind of a fascination with it, but it was still something I would never do. And then in May of 2015, I went to see Jane's Addiction, and they have like girls that do that at their concerts. And the girls looked like they were having a really good time. And I was like, I want to try that. And so then I kind of got like this bug that I had to try it. So I spent literally a year researching different people that did it. Like I asked for like referrals, who to go with, who is reputable, because obviously I'm not just going to let any random person put hooks in my back. And then I like talked to different people on the suspension forum on Facebook and asked them about their experience with it. Like, what did it mean to them? How did it feel? Was it painful? What did they get out of it, etc. And so then like a little bit over a year later, in August 2015 or 2016, I did my first suspension on Long Island with Sarah Scotty from White Flag Suspension, and I really enjoyed it. It was really cool. I didn't have the religious experience that a lot of people talk about, because a lot of people claim that it's like a religious thing.
Well, I guess Native American cultures.
Yes.
They did the suspension kind of a rite of passage into manhood or something. Yeah.
Derived from the Okipa. I forget which tribe that is, and then it's not like there's different, I guess, like tribes for the Sioux tribe. It's part of the Sioux tribe's Sundance ceremony is the suspension, but theirs is a little bit different because it was like wood sticks, I think, that or animal bones that they stuck under the skin, and the point of it was for the men, and it was only men, for them to suspend until it literally ripped out the flesh. So that's a lot different than the modern version of suspension.
Well, listen, hey, I have to say I admire you there for your bravery as far as this goes. When I was in the hospital this week, they rolled in this big computerized device and started giving me a little electric shock treatment up and down my arms and my legs to see if there's any problems with the muscular response. And then another doctor came in and started putting needles under my skin. And actually, I thought of you. I don't know why.
Well, that sounds more kind of like acupuncture, which
I
have such a low tolerance for, just because I can't sit still for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But Iron Eyes Cody invited me to participate in the Sandan ceremony, but I respectfully declined when I saw, as she just told us, it goes through your pectorals, and you hang there until the flesh rips.
Yeah, that's too much.
And yeah, that is too much. And at the time, I was an avid weightlifter, and if I say so myself, I had really terrific pecs. And I thought I would hang there for a week before the flesh broke.
I don't think
no way.
Muscle, though. It doesn't go through the muscle, because I actually, at least not with the body mod version of it. I don't know if the Native American. I would think if it went through the muscle, that'd be dangerous, because it could paralyze the muscle.
Yes, but of course they do it, on the surface. But it's really quite a ceremony.
Well, people watching the YouTube edition of this will get to see a clip from Samantha's video in which she's suspended.
Oh, yeah, it was the second time I did suspension, which was this summer,
when she was
in August, with Steve True.
Excuse me, when she was talking about suspension, I was trying to visualize a young woman participating, and I thought it has to be a variation of the Native American ceremony.
Well, I did it through my back. The first time I did it, it was 2 hooks through my back. The second time this year, it was 4 hooks through my back. And the first time I only stayed up for about 10 minutes because I was outside. It was August. It was like 100 degrees out on Long Island. But the second time I did it at a tattoo convention, and I stayed up for like 45 minutes. I could have stayed up longer, but I had to come down because they had something planned that was going on. Like, I think they were giving out awards for the tattoos or whatever. But It's honestly not painful. Everyone thinks it's going to be painful. I know that there are other areas of the body that, like the resurrection, which is right under the breast, that is very painful. But for the back, which is called a suicide suspension, it's really not painful. Like once the hooks go in, your endorphins kick in, and it's just kind of like a rush, and you're kind of like very like happy and giddy. Though, however, like about 6 hours after it, you start to feel pain. The first time it was really horrible, like worst pain I was ever in. Second time it really wasn't that bad. It just, you don't want to really do anything.
Well, you're a remarkable young woman.
Well, you guys think of it differently than my parents do. They wish I would never do it again. I'm constantly begged. My dad like tries to threaten me, like, okay, well, you're not gonna get anything for Christmas this year if you do that.
But all you want is a suspension bar. So what?
Right.
Oh no, you get to keep the hooks. I have the hooks on the nightstand in my bedroom.
That's great. That's great.
I remember going to an underground club in the village many years ago, and there were I guess some strippers and dancers and all, and they were bare to the bone and sticking each other with these needles and putting them up and
were they like do like the skewers?
Yeah,
I would never do that. There are some people that do that in their burlesque acts and stuff, and it looks really cool. But that is not for me. I would never do that.
And some of them even light up.
Yeah, that's too much.
You got to get a little bit of color into your act there,
Yeah.
I
draw a line at it.
Black and blue just won't do it by itself,
Yeah, I draw a line at it. I would only ever do my back, I think, just because I don't like scars, and I have the scars in my back, which I just don't care because I don't really see my back. But as for anything else, no, I would never do the chest or the knees or any of that.
Well, I hear the man up in the sky is calling, and we're having our first little break here, and then we will be back in just a few minutes.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Prince Charming in a black leather jacket waits me in the Bowery Bar. They all recognize him, and I wish I didn't know who he was. I said I'll never do this again, but now I've got his song singing in my head. I sick infatuation makes me wanna die. I don't wanna fall in love with you tonight. You know I never wanna fall in love again. Promise myself I wouldn't give my heart up easily to him. Now it's calling me baby. Page 6 says he's seen a
Well, I want a seat in the VIP section, as close
fantastic.
as close to the stage as possible. Samantha, so what was the name of the cut we were listening to?
That was page 6.
And do you have a website that features your music?
Yeah, everything, like whether it's my music, my clothing line, my radio show, it's all on samanthascarlette.com, and Scarlett is spelled Scarlette. I spelled it that way for Google purposes.
Well, there you go. Well, wonderful. We'll come back later on and we'll play another tune. And like I said, some of this will be in our YouTube edition, which Peter will be working on, and it will be up shortly, one would hope. So, Brother Brad, what's going on out there in Iowa?
Well, would you believe we're getting our first snow tonight?
Oh, wow.
I love the snow in Iowa, especially with you and Sherry. We went out singing Christmas carols. and I almost slid right across the lake.
You
that was-
almost did.
It was freezing cold.
Well, that was a warm day.
We went looking for the little, I guess, monument that had been left in tribute to the Big Bopper and all the others that had gone down in that terrible
Buddy Holly.
that terrible
Richie Valens.
Yeah. We never did find it though because we couldn't quite get over the barbed wire fence.
No, they have it much more accessible now.
It should be. And it's the only airport that I've ever seen that actually has a thing about, an air crash. I mean, most of them want to cover that up and keep it well tucked away. But there's a little plaque outside the airport, and tourists do come. And the hall where they gave their last performance is still giving shows there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's perpetually, and I mean all the big names in the music business. They come there as if it's a sacred place to do homage. So we have the top groups who come, and then every year at the time, in either the end of January, first part of February, there's a whole Buddy Holly festival. Mm-hmm. They come from all over. They come from France.
We lost one of our favorite musicians from the 1950s and 60s just a couple of days ago, Mr. Fats Domino.
Right.
I remember I found my thrill on Blueberry.
That's right.
Walking to New Orleans.
Yeah,
and a great musician and a talented individual and a very humble gentleman, to say the least. And of course, we thought we had lost him during Katrina because he had kind of just he had asthma real bad, and nobody had heard from him. And they finally found him. He was at home, and of course the place that he owned there was kind of in shambles, but he did survive, and he continued to perform for a number of years, and was one of the first inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So,
another great loss. Kind of a loss.
The
mystique of the tribute, the area, which is, remember there's a lot of snow that kind of prevented us from finding the monument too. So at any rate, we had a delivery, and the fellow said, I've never been, as he's unloading the massage chair that we bought, a very large chair. And he says, I've really busted butt getting here because I want to have time without getting behind my schedule to stop and play my tribute at Buddy Holly's grave. And he was probably, he said he'd been a sailor, he'd been a policeman, and he had to be in his mid-60s anyway. But he wanted to go out there, and I said, I gave him directions, and I said, I hope you have better luck than a buddy of mine I did on Christmas. But Sherry said one thing she wanted you to know is that tonight we're not going to sing Christmas carols.
Well, maybe we have... Go ahead.
Well, we have another singer on tonight, so we'll listen to another of her songs.
That's right. Well, I was going to say maybe you could sing Halloween.
Me?
Oh no!
If this was
everybody.
Oh, okay, yeah. If I was feeling my normal self, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Not so much tonight, though.
No, we'll get Brad and Tim Beckley to sing.
We could do the mash. The monster mash. It was a graveyard smash.
He did the mash. That's pretty good there, Brad. Well, Well, I think one of the reasons that that we're here tonight is that hopefully we can talk about some of our favorite scary stories. Whether or not they happened to us, or if maybe somebody told you their scary story that just absolutely floored you. I mean, I think everybody has something at least once in their life that probably scared the hell out of them, that they either can't explain or don't want to try to explain. And hopefully when Tim Beckley comes back, he'll have some for us because he always has, just some great stories. But we'll start with you, Brad. I mean, you've been around the block a few times, and you've. I mean, and you're not. You've never been, just an armchair writer. I mean, I know that you've been out there, in the field and seen some things yourself. I mean, out of all the stuff that you have experienced, what would you say would be the one thing that just right now just stands out in your mind? Is this being something that just scared the hell out of you?
Well, it took a while for the hell to get scared out of me, because I think that I grew up in a haunted house.
That's right.
It had been the old stagecoach stop, and as my sister and I would say, as we would see entities walking through at night, there must have been a lot of people who missed the stage, because the passengers, some of them are still roaming around. So, but the thing of it was, after, sometimes you got startled, sometimes, and the haunting increased as we got older. Now I've reflected on this many times, because when we were small, they just kind of walked through the bedrooms and so forth. Now, the only time you really felt a shiver is when they stopped and made eye contact with you. Mm-hmm. Then you felt, what's come next? But most of them just walked through. And my mother, who could have been a medium if she had chosen, or maybe she was, and I didn't realize that how much, but she would communicate with one of the female ghosts, and this ghost gave a lot of information, because we had converted the stagecoach stop into a farm home, and so this ghost would tell Mom, to advise my father, that a big storm was coming, or, it was time to get in, don't hesitate any longer. And really, I look back, really pragmatic advice, that was worthy of listening to. As we grew older, then the thumps and the bumps and the crashes and the moving of furniture and so forth, that really would, especially if you were home alone and suddenly things began moving and pounding the walls and so forth. I was never that steel-hearted, but I never felt that I would be harmed. So it wasn't until many, many years later that investigating a home in Nebraska, and it was at one time been a mansion kind of on the old trail out west, and lots of things were happening there, and none of them particularly pleasant. Blood would flow from the basement walls from time to time, and really coarse-looking entities were seen that frightened all the family. So
can I stop you here? You're saying blood flew from blood was coming out of the basement walls? Like, did you ever take pictures of this? Did you ever get samples of it? Like, that's insane.
Well, the thing that had happened, you see, is it had sat empty for a time, as you might suppose, and a number of bodies were found in the basement in which they had been murdered horribly, throat slit and so forth, and
normal.
that may have been psychically the reason for the blood. Now, we never took samples because this was just reported to us by the individuals, but we did have record of the murders that had been found there when the place sat empty.
Now, is that the famous place where they would actually have like salesmen and travelers stay overnight, and then they would mysteriously kind of vanish or disappear?
No, that was another one.
That's another one.
But in this particular case, Irene Hughes, the very famous medium, whom some people will recognize her name, she's no longer with us on the earth plane, but she and I were in a closet area, and she was picking up impressions, and I was recording them. And the door kept trying to close. Now, I don't know I think you may have met my friend Glenn McQuain at one time, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
He was a former Green Beret, and I always loved having him with me. And there were a number of newspaper people there recording, what is the ghost hunter and the medium going to find and so forth. So everyone was taking notes and watching us move around. And we were, as I said, recording, and the door kept trying to close on us. And it was really difficult because this was really a roughly poured cement basement floor. And the door had to kind of push itself over some risings in the cement. So when we left, I said, okay, the blankety blank thing, once the door closed, close it and lock it. And I realized too late that this was not just a haunting. There was an intelligence involved here, an intelligence that I could make angry. And we no longer had got upstairs when at the door we heard it just shatter as it was ripped from the hinges. Then we heard boom, boom, boom coming up the steps. And all 6 of us investigators and newspaper people were lifted into the air and then dropped.
Wait a minute. This happened to you?
Yes.
You were lifted into the air. Well, then you have done suspension.
Thankfully, we did not stay very long.
I don't know. I think my version's less scary.
Yeah. Well, Tim said he wanted a scary one, so
that's a good scary one.
And I mean, when you were lifted up, I don't know, a matter of seconds, I guess. Did you feel weightless or gutless?
I felt amazement. I felt amazement because I had to revise, because I had written at that time at least 2 or 3 books on ghosts.
Yes.
And I had presented the theory that largely what we're talking about is a residual element that just as a film is somehow impressed, right? It can be played back by people of the proper psychic affinity. And if you go into a bedroom where someone, poor person, maybe had died an anguished death due to disease, and this had lasted a while, you almost can feel, the type of anguish still somehow impressed in that environment. And I felt that this would really account for the majority. I mean, we went to this was way back in the 60s, some of it, and we went to, hippie houses and so forth where they had manifestations occurring. And you can think of all kinds of reasons why they were seeing apparitions and so forth. Some of it may have been fueled by other elements that were imbibed. But at any rate, the group mind of these people in that particular home would create these kind of entities that we could dissolve with kind of an exorcism, not the formal Roman Catholic sort and so forth, but just
You would call him
banishing them.
You would call him Paulino instead of the local priest.
Right.
Mhm.
So this was a situation then in which I had to revise, that there are intelligences that are, responding to how we respond to them, and what we might say and how we might treat them. And it was almost an awakening of sorts, because then house after house that we investigated, it seemed like a door had been opened,
Well,
where
do you
we would
think
hear.
were they being the spirits, for lack of a better terminology,
Right.
aware that Brother Brad was coming?
That's one of the questions, that give me kind of a shiver, even still, because the people largely were unaware. On occasion, one had read my book, or they'd heard of me, or heard me on Coast to Coast or whatever, and so they knew who I was. But most of them is just this guy and his team that would come and maybe de-haunt your house, sort of thing. But yes, sometimes it felt as though I was expected, and the various demonstrations would seem to lend to that, because Tim, you and I, ever since we've known each other, which is in decades now.
Oh well, 19. Instead of doing ghost books, you had just done your first book on UFOs, strangers
Right.
from the sky.
1966.
And I met you, I believe it was at the great Commodore Hotel
Exactly.
UFO event that Mr. Jim Mosley put on, and I got to introduce Roy Finnis, and Vi Venus landed from outer space, and Long John showed up with Paris Flamand, and it was the largest indoor UFO conference, which attracted probably about 30,000 people for the entire weekend.
Yes. And we've been brothers ever since.
Indeed.
But my point was, we've always had a sense of humor about things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we take things seriously, both of us. And I'm talking about the other Tim too. I'm going to include him.
Thank you.
But yet, we don't hang our entire existence on what we may find, or what may occur, or what we may apprehend. And we've always been able to laugh at ourselves if we really get flustered, or if we really get frightened, and discussing it between us helps bring things back to moderation again. And so that kind of attitude I tried to maintain all during my ghost hunting days. The ones that we've encountered with Sherry, now that's very interesting, because Sherry never went with me on a ghost expedition, but she herself, she attracts ghosts, I guess, but because we stayed in hotel rooms, and we stayed in various homes and so forth, where the manifestations have occurred. And one particularly in Bellingham, Washington, where we were scheduled to give a lecture, she kept waking me or confused, because she says, "What are you doing in bed? But you're sitting over there." And she thought she saw me sitting in a chair, and then she saw a man pacing and pacing and pacing. And then, and this would freak me out, she's lying there, and a baby's hand grabs her finger. And she sees a baby in bed with her. And then, of course, we find out that our host, because Sherry really didn't sleep much that night, and we had to be. So I said, "Well, try to get a little sleep. I'll go down and have breakfast with our hosts and so forth." And there's a whole group there just staring at me when I walk in, and they say, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" And of course, this was a room in which a sorrowing husband is, his wife is really dying in childbirth, and the baby is delivered, and that's why that was the man she saw pacing, not I, and that was the man she saw sitting in the chair weeping, not I, and the baby that grabbed her finger, that was Sherry's saying she thinks it was guided to her because Sherry's a great mother, and maybe that little baby, wherever it exists now, needed a little of the mother vibration. But those are the kind of things that Sherry and I have experienced. And of course, I suppose, in a sense, I'm a ghost magnet too, since I've grew up in a haunted house and have seen them ever since I was a kid. So,
Well, this is a conversation and a half, and we welcome the listeners, of course, to call in, side, regardless of what side of the veil they may be telephoning from. And we will be right back, and with our exciting show celebrating the best night of the year. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz, and tonight we're talking with Brad Steiger and Samantha Scarlette. So now, Samantha, we've heard a scary true story from Brad. What about yourself? Anything happened to you?
I've had a lot of experiences with ghosts or what I think are ghosts, but I'm not convinced. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't even know where to start. I guess I'll just tell ones that happened in hotels, because then maybe other people can go and experience for themselves. So the first time where I was at a hotel where it seemed to be haunted was when I was 17, so 10 years ago. For 4th of July, my mom and I went for 2 weeks to the Coronado Del Hotel, the big Victorian that's known to be haunted. But we actually didn't even stay in the original hotel. They have newer buildings that I think were built in the 70s or 80s, maybe even the 90s. I mean, they're pretty new, that are next to the hotel. And the newer section is built over where, I guess, back in the 1800s when the hotel first opened. Obviously, the Hotel Del was for the ultra rich. But if people who were middle class, who couldn't afford to stay in the hotel, they had next to it, there was campgrounds that were on the hotel grounds. I guess you could use the hotel amenities, just didn't have a hotel room. So where we were staying was built over these old campgrounds. And the first night we got there, I guess there's it's been 10 years. There were anomalies where the sound on the TV would go up and down. And the one day I was in the bathroom and I was flat ironing my hair, and I had a CD on the CD player. This is back when everyone still had CDs. And all of a sudden, the sound on the CD player, it changed. I can't remember if it went up or down, but it went it spiked off the charts, and then it switched songs on its own. It was just bizarre. And in the middle of that trip, because I was like 17, I loved Fall Out Boy. I made my mom take me to this thing that was for the Fall Out Boy fan club, where you had to check out. We had to check out of the hotel, and it was like a 2-day thing where you stayed with like the Fall Out Boy. It was like a convention. So we went to this Fall Out Boy convention thing, and then we went back to the Hotel Del. And I was like, Mom, I really, really, really want to stay in the old section, the Victorian section. Can we do it? She's like, fine, Samantha, you go take care of checking in. I'm going to the beach. So I check into this room in the old section. It was oceanfront. Our other room had been oceanfront. And I get into the room, and it just felt really creepy. And like the guy who was the bellhop, he even said to me, "Are you sure you want to stay in this room?" And I was like, "I'm fine." I was like, "I'm fine." It wasn't the Kate Morgan room. The Kate Morgan room actually faces the road. It's on like the other side of the hotel. It wasn't any like known haunted room. And I just, like that was obviously a bad thing. And like the fan or something in the room wasn't working, and they had to send up some like tech guy engineer to like fix that. And the way that the room was set up, because when the hotel was built in like the 1880s, they didn't have internal plumbing. So like it's like a narrow room, and then in the center of the room, there's like a bathroom that juts out. So there's like a bedroom, bathroom, sitting room, and like a tiny little breezeway. So I hadn't showered that morning because I got up really early to leave the Fall Out Boy convention, which was at like a Holiday Inn, and I was just skeeved out. And so I was like, okay, I'll shower in the room. So I go and I take a shower in this bathroom in the Del, and the curtains in this dingy and that's the other thing, the lighting wasn't that great. And this is 2007 in a 5-star hotel. The lighting wasn't that great. The shower curtains were blowing, and it freaked me out. So then after I got out of the shower, I took a picture on the door with my digital camera of the hotel map, how they have for fires, so I could show my friends oh, this is how far I am from the Kate Morgan room, the haunted room. And I took 2 pictures in there. And then I went to my computer and I imported the pictures. Now I had on that same camera, and it was like a $800 Canon point-and-click camera that I'd gotten for my birthday that year. I had several hundred pictures that I'd taken the day before at the Fall Out Boy concert and at the zoo, the San Diego Zoo with Fall Out Boy. And all those pictures came out. All my Fall Out Boy pictures were there on the computer. The 2 pictures I took in the hotel room came up corrupted. Huh. So my mom comes up from the beach, and she comes into the room, and she's just as soon as she got in there, she's like, "We're not staying in this room." She just felt this terrible vibe. So we checked out of that room. We went back to the new section, to another oceanfront room, and we had weird stuff in that room. When the light thing, the cord to the lamp was out of the socket, but it was hanging out of the socket. It was really bizarre. And the last night that we were in that room, when we were checking out, I had put another CD in the CD player, and I forgot my CD. And as we were checking out, as we were taking our last bit of luggage out of the room, the CD player came on. The ghost was reminding me that I had left my CD in the CD player. And there was all other stuff there, the one night when we were walking at night by the pool, by the beach, it smelled like there was perfume or something. And then the one night when I wanted to go try to find the Kate Morgan room, we got lost in the old section. It was terrifying. It felt like it was out of The Shining, Rose Red, how the hallways were. And it was it's a maze. And it was just really creepy back then, because I don't know now, but there was no cell phone reception on Coronado, so you couldn't even call for help. And it took us an hour to find our way back to the elevator. So that was a really creepy experience. So I definitely think that there's something at the Hotel Del that's haunted. And then more recently at the Plaza Hotel in New York, I've had weird stuff happen when I've stayed on the 5th floor. Back in December 2014, I was staying there with my mom actually at Christmas. She had bought me for Christmas tickets to see him and the Smashing Pumpkins 2 nights in a row, and we stayed over at the Plaza. And when we got to that room, the first day that we were there was issues with the heat. It was when we first got that night, I had put the heat on, and that night when we came back to the room, and this is December in New York, it was 90 degrees in the room. Oh. And we couldn't get the heat down. And my mom was she was Samantha, did you I'm I don't know, and I'm really tech savvy, so she had to call the engineer, and they couldn't figure out how to get the heat down. There was something wrong with it. It would not turn down. And there was other stuff. Every time she took a shower, her shower was cold. My shower was normal. And there was a lot of stuff that happened. The second day we were there was really freaky, because I got out of the shower and I noticed and I didn't tell my mom until we checked out. I noticed in the hallway, or like the entryway to the hotel room, there was what looked to be bleach and blood stains on the carpet. And that hotel was renovated in like 10 years ago. So these are new it's not like this goes back years. Like, so there were bleach stains in the carpet, and there was just other weird stuff that happened on that trip. Like, we got somebody else's newspapers. It was the day that the royal family was visiting from England, and they gave me newspapers from like the UK Telegraph that had the royal family stuff. There's all these UK papers. I was like, oh, that's nice of them that they gave me the things. And then on checkout, it like had on the thing like, oh, you ordered the UK Telegraph, and we didn't order that. So it was like as if somebody had stayed in our room right before, and it was weird. Oh, because also when we checked in, that there wasn't supposed to be any rooms available on the price range that room was on. And then magically we asked, oh, do you have any rooms at the whatever level it was available? And they're like, you know what? We have one room that just came available. So I honestly can't remember all of it in detail, but it was just really freaky. And my mom was like, do you think this room's haunted? I'm like, oh, no. And then when I told her about the bleach stain, she was freaked out. And I sent the pictures to a friend that was like a mortician. And she's like, those look like they happened within the last month, anywhere from 24 hours to 1 month. So that was on the 5th floor. Fast forward a year later, we had stayed there one other time in between. We were on a different floor. I'm going to an event in New York, and my mom and my assistant stay with me in this room on the 5th floor. And I got back from this event at like 4 a.m, and I come into the room, and I'm telling them about the event, and all of a sudden we hear this loud banging on one of the walls, like to the east, and it's like so loud, like I can't even explain it. It sounded like the hotel was collapsing. And my assistant looked down to the hallway, and there was a night like patrol, like security doing night patrol. And the guy, he was like terrified. He was like, "Well, I'm gonna try to see what that was." So then, like 10 minutes later, there was another loud banging, but it came from the opposite direction, and it was just really freaky. And both times that I had these weird experiences at the hotel, it was on the 5th floor. And if you look into the hotel's history, when the hotel was first built, like during the construction, one of the construction workers was murdered, and his body fell to the 5th floor. And then there was also the Woolworths heiress, Edna Hutton, commit suicide on the 5th floor. So don't ever stay on the 5th floor of the Plaza Hotel in New York.
I guess not.
Yeah. And I've stayed in that hotel a bunch of times, and I've never had an issue.
Their public relations department is sending us an email right now.
I love the hotel. It's great. I love their food.
Yeah.
I eat there all the time, but don't stay on the 5th floor unless you're looking for ghosts.
Well, you know, it seems that hotels have gotten a mighty reputation in recent years. I don't know, maybe it started with The Shining, of being haunted. I don't know, and every ghost club in America, it seems to be they're always inviting people down to their weekend event at some local hotel. Now, of course, I stayed at the Hotel Colorado.
Oh, the Stanley.
Yeah. Well, no. This is the one in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about maybe 40 miles from Aspen, and there are all kinds of haunted stories of little ghosts. I guess there was maybe someone had committed a suicide there, 100 years ago or so, and they actually the guests are welcome to congregate in the lobby at midnight to go on a little ghost tour. So you never know when you're going to run into. It's funny, when I was growing up, a ghost had such I was going to say negative a connotation, not just in the sense that of being something particularly ghoulish or whatever. But they were often associated, well, if you were going to believe in ghosts at all, the thinking of the day, I guess maybe because my dad was a Baptist, was that it had to be, from hell. I mean, it was something that the devil was responsible for. Now, in our own case, and I think I told this story, I remember one time on Coast to Coast, and George Norrie was kind of aghast that I had, the family had this experience, and I guess I had never mentioned it before, that my Grandfather on my father's side of the family, they came from a small town in Kentucky, Shelbyville, which is famous, of course, for Colonel Sanders. That was where he opened his first KFC. And my grandfather apparently had some sort of experience where he had seen a headless ghostman, cavalry rider, in back of the barn one night. And I guess this was, we had figured out, or somebody had mentioned from the family, that it was the ghost of a Confederate a war soldier who had lost, I guess, had his head decapitated by a cannon ball. But he would never talk about the experience. I think he mentioned it to my dad once, and said he never wanted to speak about it, and he never did. But I think it was because of his connection to the church more than anything else. But Brad, has there been a preponderance of cases where headless horsemen have been seen?
Yes, that's not. You had mentioned this to me before. In fact, I think I even used it in a book of your sighting. It's obviously. Oh, excuse me. In my opinion, it has to be symbolical, and you're seeing an entity, you're seeing a force, but without a head. What does that tell you? This doesn't have any direction. This doesn't have any plan or really purpose other than to alert you that there is something beyond what you experience in your everyday life. And that there's, whether it's another dimension, whether it's entities from another time and space, but contact has been made. And certainly now your grandfather, he obviously told the family, and you've been having sightings, and you've had mysterious experiences.
Well,
ever since you were a little boy.
Well, my mysterious experiences now seem to center dramatically on synchronicities. I just did this book about Philip K. Dick. He believed that we were actually well. You're in the book. I mean, what am I telling tell you about this? But most people are surprised actually to find out that he thought he might have actually been a star child.
Mm-hmm. Which is why he wrote. Which is why he began to write to me.
Uh-huh. And how did that come about?
Oh, he was going to the dentist, and he had received something that would ease the pain, whatever shot it may have been. And while he was in this altered state and having his tooth worked on, he saw a picture of my book, The Divine Fire. And then an entity, a female entity.
Fabulous book, by the way. One of the best.
Thank you. He saw then an entity which he associated with revelation. And she said, you will find answers in this book. So as soon as he recovered from the dentist, he went to a bookstore and bought Revelation, the Divine Fire, and read it. And then before he wrote to me, he read The Star People, and then he wrote and said, "My name is Philip Dick. You may not have heard of me. I write science fiction stories." Well, of course, I heard of Philip K. Dick.
And everybody's heard of him now.
Right. And as I said, we corresponded regularly over the phone, and of course, writing. We didn't have the wonderful internet to go back and forth at that time, but sending letters and telephone calls. And he had just seen the movie that's been remade now a second time. I don't know if he would have approved of the remake or not. and I never really heard. He said, "I'm going." No, this has happened to me so many times in my life, where someone writes to me and says, "I'm going to the studio. I'm going to see a rough cut, and then I'll tell you about it." He says, and I want to come over to Phoenix, where we were living then. He says, "I want to come over to Phoenix and discuss it with you." Well, he saw the movie, told me he had landed. He was getting ready to pack up and come, and then he passed away.
Ah.
So this has happened with a number of
Well,
leaders.
By a coincidence, next week Tessa Dick will be a guest on the program.
Yes.
And of course, she's written several books of her own, and
Yes.
she's did the introduction to the Mind Control Matrix of Philip K. Dick.
I was pleased to see that. I was pleased to see.
Well,
she did.
I think of all the books that I've done in recent times, of all out of the 285,
Yeah.
I would believe that I would believe that would be my best study. Certainly, it has to be one of the most thorough ones on synchronicity. I mean, I'm bored by when people say, "Oh, synchronicity." Yes, I thought of so and so, and they called on the telephone the next day. I hadn't seen him in 6 months.
Right.
So, and some guy on YouTube says, "Oh, synchronicity." I had a girlfriend and I hadn't seen her, and then I ran into her in the street, and because I had been thinking about her or something like that, never mind. But I mean, or you wake up and you see 444. I don't even understand the significance of that. To be to really take. I mean, I have weird things happen to me. Like I meet with the former librarian of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, a group that's been out of existence for 25 years, and then I drive down to Sedona, where nobody even knows that I'm going, and we come out of the coffee shop, and next to us is parked an automobile with a license plate Apro on it. I mean, people say, "Oh, they knew you were coming." Nobody knew I was coming,
No,
and even if they did know we were coming, what were we driving? I don't even know what we were driving because it wasn't my vehicle. I mean, they could have been parked in the back lot, but they were parked right next to us in the space.
Yeah.
I mean, that place is just darn right spooky down there in Sedona. I mean. We've had a couple of things happen there that just don't sit right.
Well, I've paid you tribute a number of times because you have kept so many volumes of historical and spiritual value. You've kept them alive. The present generation wouldn't even have heard of them without you, Timothy.
I'm still not sure that they have.
Well, but you've got it there.
Yeah.
Now, your book with Philip K. Dick is certainly self-revelatory. If no one had ever heard of you, which I can't imagine, but let's say there is such a person, he wouldn't have to know what you've done and what you're going to do. But reading that book is like an adventure. I mean, at this point, I would say that's your masterpiece, kid.
I agree with you 100%. Don't you agree, Tim Swartz? Sleeping.
So, no, I'm here.
You're in that candy bag again.
Oh yeah. That's right, Tim. I totally agree.
Well, you'll be getting a nice raise.
There you go. What was that question again?
Swartz. Swartz.
Brad, how many books have you actually written? Do you know?
I think not many people else know that I've ghosted a number of books.
Once in a while, somebody will ask me about that.
And you'd recognize?
I can't. I am under strict contract because many of them happen to be movie stars, and the contract I signed in one situation, this well-known actor had written a script, and he presented it, and they said, "Yeah, we really like this and make a movie, but you know." The custom is now, at least at that time, you know, when we have a movie like this come out, we have a book to go along with it. And he says to him, "Do you have such a book?" And he says, "Yeah, I have such a book." I hear the starting up there, so I better not go farther.
We'll have to interrupt you here so we can go to our break. We'll be right back.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Oh, you've been a bad boy, but who really wants the nice? The others can't see through you. To them you're sweet and kind, but I can see into your soul. I know you carnally. I know just who you are. You're the one that corrupted me. Come be my fallen angel. Let's sin together in hellfire. Tempt me with your danger. Boy, you set my heart on fire. Come be my fallen angel. Let me burn in your hellfire. Come tempt me with your danger. Boy, you get me so high.
All right, welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. And Samantha, what was the name of that song that we just heard?
That was These Violent Delights.
I like that one. That's
Yeah.
a good one.
Thank you.
Very nice.
I'm going out and buying the album. Are there albums
Yeah.
anymore?
I have it on a compact disc. You can buy a
All
CD
right.
of it,
All
but
right.
you can get everything's on like Spotify, Tidal, iTunes, Amazon,
But
digital.
that's for young
Right.
people.
Right.
Yeah.
And anyway, what's your inspiration for a song? Like,
It just depends. That song was written about an ex-boyfriend, and actually, originally the instrumental part of that I wrote different lyrics to. I wrote the instrumental probably in like 2010, 2011, and it was some song where I was actually was watching Marie Antoinette or one of those things, and it was like "Let them eat cake" was the original lyrics to that song. Where like "Let them eat cake," she said that mistake cost her head or something. But then when I was reevaluating demos to do for my Violent Lights, Violent Ends album, I rewrote the lyrics and wrote them about my ex-boyfriend being like demonic and evil. And so that
I'm sure he was.
yeah,
I'm
he
sure he was.
really was. But so that's how that song came to be. And that song was produced by Hilly Halisma, who has produced like half the albums for the band Him, who are really popular in like the goth rock kind of metal genre. So yeah, I guess that song, I mean, like the stuff on Violent Delights, Violent Ends actually has probably as much of a goth or metal vibe as I will ever do, just because Hilly produced like 5 of the songs. So they definitely have a hilly sound to them. Whereas anything else I've done, like Page 6 I did with Justin Salter, and that's mostly just like my complete vibe of alt rock or new wave. So
Now, how would you say your influences have changed, or have they? I mean, have you gone off in a different direction musically since when you started your career?
With my stuff, I've always pretty much had the same influences. Like I've said, like with the Violent Delights, Violent Ends album, it definitely had a different vibe because I did it with Hilly, and Hilly is like known for like this goth rock metal sound. But like my other stuff is very similar. Like I feel like if you listen to Page 6 and then you listen to Into the Darkness, because I did those to Justin Salter, those kind of sound more like they go together. than the stuff on Violent Lights, Violent Ends. So though people say that they hear the alt rock influence on Violent Lights, Violent Ends, I personally don't hear that. I hear more like this goth sound, whereas Page 6, it's more evident like that I was inspired by alternative, but I don't know.
Well, now, when you say alternative, that's kind of always confused me as far as music goes. How would you do? I mean, I know what heavy metal is. I know
I
what
guess to
classic
me,
rock.
when I say alternative rock, I know it's like a broad spectrum. I guess when I think of like alternative rock, I think of like Smashing Pumpkins, Jane's Addiction, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, like who else? Like Stone Temple Pilots, Bush. I just think of like the early 90s stuff. I guess a lot of that's also grunge, but I just think of like early 90s rock as being like alt rock. I mean, there's newer alternative rock, like the Silverstone Pickups would be like current alternative rock. It's such a like broad spectrum now, like especially with the internet. Everything, it's hard to classify a lot of stuff. Like Lana Del Rey could kind of fall into like being rock, and then she could fall into being pop. It's kind of like hard to really define things these days.
Yeah,
but
yeah. When Brad and I would go to see Buddy Rich, we knew who we were going to see. Right. In fact, I remember Brad. I was, Buddy Rich was a famous drummer, and he had a interest in UFOs. In fact, I guess he'd had a couple of sightings out there in Las Vegas. And
I feel like anybody on the West Coast has sightings, though. Like when I lived in Phoenix, I had sightings.
Well, you know that people have had. I've had people tell me stories here, and we've had guests on the program where these objects they lived on 29th Street or 28th Street, off of 3rd Avenue, and these things on July 4th would come down and press a gal almost down to the down to the rooftop, and then people would go up to Pine Bush, which is about an hour and a half from here, and have all kinds of pretty weird stories and abductions. And we had Bruce Cornett. I remember Tim, 6 months ago maybe, and he told about all these weird things that he and Ellen Crystal had seen up there, and they were taking videotapes of these objects coming down, and of course the town now, Brad, celebrates UFO Day during the summer, and has little UFO speeches. Travis Walton was there, and Peter Robbins, of course, he lives nearby. And Linda Zimmerman, who's one of our favorite guests, she's the big authority on the Hudson Valley boomerang that attracted so much attention back in the, early mid 1980s.
All I know. All I know is I feel like all the stuff on the West Coast, well, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it, I feel like is military test craft. Because when I lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix, I would see stuff like almost once a year. I'd have a sighting of something, but with the exception of one case where I was like out walking at like 3 a.m. in 2005, and I saw this weird like gasoline looking object in the sky that like disintegrated. Everything else, it always would magic.
Kind of like steampunk.
No, it's hard to explain what I saw. It was like this really large object up in the sky, and then it kind of like disappeared into like a shimmery type of thing that I can only explain that it looked like gasoline. But let's put it this way, it terrified me that I ran all the way home, and I thought it was either a UFO or that a plane had exploded, and no plane exploded. But with the exception of that, that was like October 2005. With the exception of that, everything else I ever saw would like magically disappear over Luke Air Force Base. So you're seeing like these V-shaped crafts, and like the lights blink out one by one, and then the final light blinks out over Luke Air Force Base. What am I supposed to take from that? Are the aliens coming and like they're intergalactically landing at Luke Air Force Base, or is the U.S. military testing stuff out? So that's kind of like my thought on Area 51 and White Sands as well, is that these are military test craft and not like intergalactic travel. Though I will say the Phoenix Lights, that one I'm baffled by. I didn't see it though because I was 7 years old when that happened, and it was a school night, so I was in bed.
Well, they were looking for you.
Yeah, clearly.
Well, they're going to come back till they find you.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Hopefully they come over New York and I can suspend up their light beam.
Absolutely, yes. Hey, so, Brad, how have your opinions changed? We just reprinted the first UFO book that I ever did with a little help from Jerry Clark, who typed the stencils in those days, and Rick Hilberg found that. Rick Hilberg found the copy in his files. It was called Inside the Saucers, and I published it in 1964.
Mm-hmm.
And you humbly made a very nice comment about those of us who started out as teen ufologists, and of course some of us, a handful at least, have kept with the subject. And going back, I don't want to toot my own horn, honk honk, but I go back and I read that little booklet there, and it amazes me. I mean, some of the theories maybe have changed, but we talked about Nazi UFOs, and we talked about UFOs that submerged and emerged from bodies of water. There was a great case in there. I don't think anybody ever discusses or even knows about. We know about the UFO case over Wanakee, New Jersey, where police officers saw this thing and it shot down a beam of light and put some holes in the ice and so forth. But over at Oradell Reservoir, this object was seen, going into the water there and
Wait,
staying.
how long ago was this?
Well, this would have been that would have been in 1960s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Bordell's not far from where I
Yeah. Well, the only reference, Robert Gribble, who was then running the National UFO Reporting Center, he put out a little newsletter in those days, and he had some details in it. And I see there was one little drawing that somebody did that was a rather crude map, which I might actually have drawn. That's on the I'm not much of an artist. I can create visuals, but I can't draw a stick man.
What time of year was this?
Well, this would have been like let's see.
We're going back to the beginning of time now here.
Well, yeah, this would have. Well, let's see. The book was from 1964 that I did. Can you imagine that, Brad? 1964.
But was it like was it in the
Yeah.
spring, the summer, fall?
Oh, gee, now you got me. It seems to me it would have been the summertime, but maybe that's only because I was born in July. But I mean, the UFO activity has continued, on. I guess, of course, in those days, everybody believed in the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and a couple of people like Jim Moseley were bamboozled into thinking that the CIA were responsible for UFOs. I always kind of get a laugh at that because people were seeing the CIA, what was the U plane or whatever it was. Well, that's nonsense. The thing is traveling up on the edge of the atmosphere. Nobody could possibly see that and mistake it as a UFO. I mean, we're talking about things that were picked up on radar and chased pilots around the sky and hovered over towns at noon and knocked out engines and automobile engines and so forth. Were you a big ETH man?
Well, at the beginning, I mean, I was 11 years old, and as soon as I was reading the newspapers, and my reaction was, "They're here, they're here," and I think we retained that kind of atmosphere and that kind of belief. Certainly, when we met, we were pretty much with the ETH at that point. But the more when I came to New York and to finish the book on Rudolph Valentino, they had me come out. They put me up in a hotel, and I met then while I was there a couple of weeks finishing the book, and I met a number of editors from different houses. Well, the editor at Award Books and I really hit it off, and he said, "Have you ever done a book on UFOs?" And I said, no, but I have a really extensive file about UFOs. And then he said, "Well, would you like to do a book?" Well, I had committed to Ivan P. Sanderson, whom you remember with great reverence, as I'm sure, I do. And he had been after me for a year to do a book on poltergeist. So that was sold, and Ivan had agreed to write the introduction and so forth. But I said, "Yeah, I'll do." And that became Strangers from the Skies. It came out just when Dr. Hynek said, it's swamp gas, which he never said and embarrassed him all the rest of his life. But at any rate, UFOs were in the paper and they're everywhere just when my book came out. And it got on the paperback bestseller in 2 weeks. Big deal, 25 cents a book. But at any rate,
right.
that's what launched me. And I've never considered myself a ufologist, but a phenomenologist or a psychical researcher. But as I traveled around the country then, because suddenly I was an expert, I had this book. So I was asked to this conference and that conference, and everyone had a story, and I talked to the contactees. And the more I talked to them, I said to myself, this is just like going to a spiritualist camp, which I had gone to several in my research. The entities gives the same bromides, gives the same advice, gives the same warnings. And I remember talking to John Keel about this, and I said, and he at that time, he was, I think, though he, of course, changed his mind from time to time, but that's when he wrote his book saying that it's the same old story, and that's, the same entities, the same whomever they are. And that's kind of where I could not do that at that time because I thought there is no dogma in this research. None of us know the final answer or even a very impressive answer because we keep changing our minds as we keep growing. But I felt then that I couldn't go all the way in my books. I had to still entertain the notion that they could be from other worlds. They could be from other. Now, to me, as you know, in my recent books, Sherry and I have emphasized the other that may present itself in a way that the individual percipient can best understand. So I started using the theme back then, what you are is what you get, what you believe is what you perceive. And that's pretty much what I'm holding now, plus an enormous number of personal experiences and encounters, if you will, with nothing that look like beings from outer space, but things that look like intelligence something. And this has seemed to go back all the way to my childhood now. Mm-hmm. Having the guide or having someone look over us. And this doesn't fit in any religious form or any religious doctrine, but in a sense it fits in all of them.
And of course, now researchers, some of them at least, there's still a few old timers like Stanton Friedman who hold true to the faith, and perhaps Kevin Randall, I'm sure, does, although he would find fault with never. But now researchers are even beginning to realize that there is a interconnection between the various anomalies that UFOs and Bigfoot could be connected, and that ghost that's pounding in your basement might have landed in a spaceship across the street. And I guess I started to realize that when someone in my family had an experience that started out with a UFO, sighting, and all of a sudden there was weird phenomena taking place in the house, and in things disappearing and teleporting and reappearing days later after they were thought to have been lost for all time. We began to realize that there's something more going on here than just little men from Mars. Although I do say that every once in a while, perhaps a true little Kelly, a humanoid, might slip through the veil and mock us from a short distance as they play on our roof and land in our fields.
Right.
Well, in fact, good old Kelly there, Brad. If it wasn't for the eclipse, it would be lost in obscurity again for another 50 years. I think wasn't that the anniversary of the actual incident?
Yes.
And they expected to make what $100 million or something on the eclipse. I don't know if they ever reached that. Not because the eclipse is kind of a fleeting thing. It's there 1 minute and it's gone. Pretty much by the time you sneeze and turn around.
That's right.
No, and very little of eclipse that was seen here, and I don't think most people in New York really care too much. They were more worried about what Donald Trump was doing, and
right,
and how they're.
We were completely clouded over, so we didn't see anything here. But for the previous one, of course, Sherry and I went to Hawaii. Not just to see that, but because we were lecturing there, of course, at the same time. So,
well, I was hoping something might happen because remember down in Mexico City, during a previous eclipse, there had been hundreds of people out in the street pointing at either a UFO, either the UFO or the planet Venus. Can't say for sure because we certainly weren't there. Did you have an eye for the eclipse there, Tim, in Indiana?
Oh yes, yeah. We had about a 98% coverage of the sun where we were.
But no UFO sighting.
Nope, nothing like that. I was like you. I was looking, but nothing fun ever happens for me.
I was inside that day. I was like, I had like all my curtains closed. I couldn't be bothered by the eclipse glasses.
Hey, speaking, good segue here. Speaking of closing the curtains, we're just about up to that midnight hour, and we'll have to say goodbye. But let's go quickly around the table, Brother Brad. What should people look for?
Well, I have these 4 books that have just come out in Kindle, part of the Real Nightmares series. And they are available on Kindle. They cover UFOs, they cover ghastly, grisly spooks and secret schemes and cabals, freaks, fiends, and evil spirits, surely bound to make your Halloween just vibrate.
At a reasonable price.
At a reasonable price, $229 a piece, I think.
Wow, we're giving them away these days, I swear.
Yeah.
And Samantha, how about you? Go to YouTube, right? Type in your name. Go to Google.
YouTube, Google, Twitter, Instagram. I'm all over the web, and you can check out my radio show Fridays on Idobi Radio at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific.
And don't we should head up the YouTube version of this show, and we'll have some clips on there. And thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Happy Halloween.
Yes, indeed.
Happy Halloween.
Yay.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the bizarre.